Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origin and evolution of American government. The executive director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This is Bill O'Brien, and today is the 29th day of June in the year 2016. It is an absolutely beautiful Wednesday here in Appalachia, and people, I think, are just breathing a sigh of relief because it's so dry. Even the humidity has left us, and we've got a cool day in the low 70s today with very low humidity. And it's a good drying day, and we've got a lot to dry. So looks like we're going to have a couple of good days, and I think we're looking 2 or 3 days out before we have a chance of rain again. And I think we have to realize that chances are we're not going to get the kind of rain we've been getting anyway. So, you have to put everything in perspective. But it's kind of looking good. And again, it's looking good for the people that are involved in the cleanup, and it's just amazing. I mean, the number of stories that you hear about Good Samaritan type stories, and people helping each other, and busloads of volunteers coming in from other places in the country. There's a group of college students who are here in southern West Virginia from Texas. I believe they're from a church in Texas. I believe it's a church. But anyway, they've offered to come and help with the cleanup and all of that. And it's just amazing, the kind of good things that are happening. Obviously, there are bad things, too. The media here, local media here, is pushing hard on a story where there were 2 women who basically were trying to scam the cleanup folks by trying to get cleaning supplies and all of that, and claiming that they had been hurt in the flood, when in fact they live in an apartment which wasn't damaged by the flood at all. And they were caught and admitted what they were doing. And the sheriff's department has said that they really want to make an example of this in order to discourage others from doing it. And of course, at the same time we're looking at this, we look at the horrible suicide bombing at the airport in Istanbul, Turkey, and we have to realize that sometimes when you get so focused on your own local situation, you lose perspective, at least temporarily, of the kind of world we unfortunately live in. And it seems to me if we could come up with a way not only to solve our local problems but to solve the world ones as well, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, what we've been talking about here, about the decision to leave the European Union on the part of the Brits last Thursday. And of course, tomorrow would be a week since the vote, since the referendum. It's hard to believe that it'll be that long, but and still the world is reeling. And I wanted to share a couple of things that I picked up in my reading. I continue to read about it. There's so much information about this. But there's an op-ed piece in today's New York Times by Bernie Sanders. And as the title of his article suggests, he's warning Democrats that they really better watch out, that there's a lesson in what happened in Great Britain and what's happening in our own election situation here. And of course, the irony is, while Bernie was writing this article, we were talking about it yesterday at the Virtual Center. So that was it's kind of reinforcing or encouraging to recognize that what we were speculating the Bernie Sanders campaign was about was, at least in the mind of the candidate himself, just that. And I found that rather reinforcing and encouraging, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. And then there's also another piece in the Times this morning by the regular op-ed writer Thomas Friedman, and Friedman makes a point which comes very, very close to the theme of yesterday's program, and I'll share that with you as well. But anyway, I hope everyone out there is doing well, and All I can say, and I know I probably won't get back to this in the course of the program today, and since this is our last program until we get back together again the first of next week, I think it's probably appropriate to say it. But if you get a lull in your lives and you kind of start to really dwell on the issues and concerns which are engulfing other people, and you detect within yourself an inkling to do something good for others, please do it. I mean that. There's a lot of hurt out there, and there's a lot of people that need the good feeling that comes with doing for others. And this is a golden opportunity to do that, at least in this region, because there are so many people that need a helping hand. So, I think that this is the time, obviously, when the best in people tends to come out. And that's an irony, because I don't know that we'll get to it today, but if not, I'm guessing that in next week's program, we're going to start looking at this whole idea of the best in people and what it is and whether it's real and whether, in fact, you can do anything to strengthen it or to encourage it or to make it more prominent or whatever. So let me alert you to the fact that there's a theme coming up in probably one of our programs next week related specifically to Thomas Jefferson that I think you'll find incredibly interesting. I found it absolutely mind-boggling and at the same time exciting. And I just continue to find things in the minds of these people in the 18th century. They thought deep. They thought in depth about things, and they speculated a lot, and they shared their ideas with each other in writing, and it's so exciting. And it's so sad that all of this is and has been available to all of us, and so few of us have been able to find the time as well as the inclination to follow up on some of this. And I really believe that that's one of the things that we're accomplishing here at the Virtual Center, is we're doing things that individuals, those individuals amongst us, don't have the time to do. And it's in that sense, it's a real service. I really believe that. I trust that there are many of you out there who have thoughts and ideas and concerns about the issues we've been talking about the last few days. And I do want to encourage you to share those with us. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your thoughts or your ideas with me in an email, one-on-one, I would love to hear from you, and I'll do the very best I can to respond to you. At minimum, I will thank you for thinking of me and thinking of the fact that I might be able to contribute something positive to the particular issue or concern that prompts you to send the email in the first place. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906, lowercase, all one word, waobrien 906 @gmail.com. And then finally, I do invite you to take the opportunity when the occasion strikes you to check out our Facebook page. I have been pretty good up until the last few days, actually. I haven't done a whole lot of posting in the last few days because I've been involved in some flood-related issues here, but and so I haven't had the time to sit down and put a whole lot on the Facebook page. But up until this past weekend, I was fairly active, and I was putting quite a bit. I put quite a bit on there the end of last week, the last 3 or 4 days of last week, and I'll be back to it again. So I do invite you to check out our Facebook page, look at the postings there, and take the opportunity to respond or to offer your thoughts on some of the opinion pieces that are there. The Facebook page is easy. Just go to Facebook, the home page, And there's a search box at the top of the homepage. And all you need to do is type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be there on our Facebook page. And then if you look down, the most recent posts are first, and then they gradually work back from the most recent. So I do invite you to avail yourself of those and take a look. I thought that it would be a good idea today to kind of go back. It's obviously for those who might be listening today who weren't with us yesterday, it's a good way to summarize a little bit of what we did and where we were as of yesterday. So in that sense, it's a kind of a review. At the same time, it's an introduction because it kind of gets our minds back in gear so we can begin to think about some of the issues we've been talking about, some of the issues at hand, and then hopefully from there we can proceed. And I will say that I'm a little bit intimidated by today's program because over the last 5 or 6 hours, I guess, so many different things have occurred to me that we could talk about. That there's any number of directions we can go in, and rather than pick one and actually develop it, I thought, well, why don't we just start to tick them off and touch on one and then touch on another and see which one might work or which one seems most appropriate or which one at the time seems to be most appealing and run with that. So that's kind of what I decided to do. So I hope it works. I hope it's not too confusing or too theoretical, as it were. I'd like to keep this as straightforward and as down to earth as I can. I don't mean to imply that I enjoy going into these unrealistic, idealistic places. But I've been told so often in my professional life that I've come to believe it. I think the evidence is overwhelming that I tend frequently to function in a rather abstract way. I kind of get into abstraction a little bit sometimes, and the irony is when I get there, I forget that I'm being abstract, and it seems like a world that I'm in, but unfortunately, sometimes it's a different world than everybody else is in. And so it becomes a little bit difficult sometimes to figure out where I am or how I got there or how I might get out or where I'm going. And I hope that you will stay with me or bear with me and hope that we can close our week's programming here this week at the Virtual Center with the kind of program that all of us can walk away from and say that was time well spent. I learned a lot. I got a lot to think about because that's really the problem. The issue. I'm not trying to provide answers to anybody. I'm basically trying to, in a sense, raise questions or just point out implications or make observations about a number of what ifs and kind of get us to thinking about some of these things in a much more broad way than we might be inclined to do so. At the beginning and some of us, and I think all of us have been exposed or have run into people that think in a very, very narrow perspective. And I find that extremely confining and restrictive. So, and that's kind of where I come from, and I hope that you will agree with me. I started to put together something to put on Facebook, a posting, and I didn't get very far. And part of the reason I didn't get very far because I had to do something today before we went on the air that took the better part of 2.5 hours, and that's time that I would have liked to have put onto this post. So it sits there on my computer unfinished and for the most part incomplete. But on the other hand, as I look back on it, as we were just about to go on the air, I took a quick look at it. And I thought, I got to finish that because I really think that this is significant. And I'd like to establish some sort of a written record that we were there and that we basically raised these issues. And they will be there for people to check on if they go back to it in a couple of days or a week or whatever. And hopefully there'll be a record. And specifically, what I'd like to do here right now is think back to the last couple of programs, yesterday's program and Monday's program. And for those of you who were with us yesterday and were with us Monday, you know that we probably lost the better part of the second hour of our program due to technical difficulties, internet difficulties on Monday. It was weather related, of course. And so I think we kind of covered that ground yesterday that we hadn't been able to on Monday. So what I thought I'd like to do would be to kind of touch on a few things and kind of get all of us focused on pretty much the same page, and then see where that particular situation might take us. We've been talking about the referendum in Great Britain held last Thursday, the decision to take Great Britain out of the European Union. And as we know, the world, not just the United States, but the entire world, has been reeling in response to that decision ever since. And about the only thing that could shift attention from the significance of that to anything else would be a horrible, inhuman act of terrorism. And of course, that's what we experienced late yesterday at the airport in Turkey. And so therefore, the media is giving an awful lot of coverage to that particular issue, as usually happens, and indeed probably should happen. Although, you know, there are those people who believe that part of the issue that is feeding the problem is the media attention that these terrorist suicide bombers get. But be that as it may, it's a horrendous loss of life. It obviously speaks to the nature of the world we're in. But the irony of the situation is, and I don't mean to stretch and connect things that don't logically connect, but the fact of the matter is, there is indeed a connection between the two issues. What we've been talking about the British vote, the British referendum to leave the EU, and terrorism. And that connection, basically, is the disenchantment and disillusion, excuse me, and outright hostility that a significant portion of the world holds toward the other portion of the world, mainly toward the developed world. There's absolutely no question that within the underdeveloped and developing world, there is a tremendous sense of bitterness and hostility towards the developed world. And it's based on the perception of exploitation. Many of these people believe that for generations, their culture, their people, their religions, their wealth has been exploited. They have been exploited. They have been taken for granted. They feel, many of them, that they've been belittled in many of these things. And obviously a debate has raged for a long time and continues to rage about whether, in fact, not that there's credibility to that, but how much credibility, how much substance, how much validity is there to it. And there are some people that believe that that's the answer to everything. Once we appreciate that, understand it, and accept it, we can begin to do something about it. And then there are other people that reject that out of hand and say basically it's driven mostly by envy and jealousy and all the rest of it, and you can't do anything about that. And then there are those people who take solace or comfort in the belief that the nature of the world we live in, the developed economic world, the increasingly connected, linked world of technology and the internet and the so-called information revolution, promises the prospects of an improved standard of living for everybody eventually. And so some people are very content in what we're doing and how we're doing it, because they believe that in the long term, this particular model of economic development, this free enterprise capitalist model that we function on, is ultimately going to successfully lift all boats, and mankind en masse is going to be the better for it. And so that faith basically causes people to believe that we really shouldn't do anything other than what we're doing. And the debate goes on, and it has gone on in various facets, in various directions and perspectives for a number of years. And I don't think we can solve that. But the fact of the matter is, behind terrorism is disaffection, is alienation, is anger and frustration and bitterness and hostility, and just name the words, because in one sense or another, most of them apply. There's no question it's that same kind of sentiment, those same emotional characteristics: frustration, anger, bitterness, fear, a sense of not knowing what's going to happen in the future, the belief that the world is out of control, that the kinds of things that are happening to us are things we can't control or do anything about. We feel helpless. We're unable to get our arms around the problem. We were raised, many of us were raised and used to believe that once we know what the problem is, we can fix it. We can solve anything. We can take care of ourselves. But this one befuddles us, because this one seems to reflect the complexity of a world that we don't understand. More importantly, a world that doesn't seem to understand us. And so therefore we feel rather vulnerable, rather helpless. And we're looking for a way to strike out or to be heard. This is not a good example. This just flashed through my mind. And it's probably not a good example, but it's the one that occurred to me. And what it is a call for help. In some ways, it's a call for help. And, people who do want to reach out or want to let other people know that they need help, or that they're here and that they matter, they count, will sometimes take different avenues or different ways to express themselves. But the fact of the matter is, much of it, in a way, is a cry for help. When I was a student in high school, and I can remember back because over the years I've thought about this many times, and it's not anything that I would take back, because I'm convinced that the way I explain what I thought I was doing made sense to me then, and it makes sense to me now. I was taking math in high school, and I was doing awfully bad. I absolutely had an awful time with math. I won't go into the details, but I was doing awfully bad. And I was doing quite well in all my other subjects. But math was a requirement. And whatever opportunities I might have to get into college and to secure scholarships and some sort of financial aid, grants and things, was obviously jeopardized by the trouble I was having in math. And I can remember being in a math class with an instructor that I really liked. He happened to be the chairman of the math department. There were several math teachers in the high school that I went to, and he was the chairman. And he was good. He was a good teacher, but he was also a good guy. And I knew he was. I just had a feeling that this guy was really nice and really good. Anyway, he scheduled the test every Thursday, and I used to have his class at the end of the day on Thursdays. Every Thursday afternoon, the last class I had was math. And he always scheduled an exam, a test on that day. And we knew invariably every Thursday in math we were going to have an exam. And obviously the exam was driven by the materials we did during the week. The formulas we solved and the problems we solved and the homework we did and all the rest of it. I knew that. Yet it didn't seem to help. And I've just found myself going down, 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 deeper, deeper, deeper. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't even know enough to know what I didn't understand, if that makes sense. I didn't know what to ask him. I can't tell you the number of times I thought I really need to go to this instructor and tell him that I don't understand. But he's going to say, what don't you understand? And I don't know what to say in response to that because I don't know what I don't understand. It's just all a blur. None of it makes sense to me. And I sit there in class and almost every day. And when the class begins, I do my homework. I struggle with my homework. Sometimes I get a few problems right, but just as often I get as many wrong. But it doesn't take too long in the math class each day. By the time I reach the halfway point of the class, I'm lost. And by the time I get within 5 or 10 minutes of the end of the math class, I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And I just have this feeling that I just like to stand up in the middle of class and just throw my arms up and say, damn it, stop. I don't know what you're doing, and I'm angry. Because I never did that. I was obviously quite shy and standoffish and was afraid to step forward and all of that. Basically, my solution was that on Thursdays when we had our regular test, I started to turn in blank papers. I would write my name and all the information, all the identifying information at the top of it, and I would number the questions, the questions we were supposed to answer on the test, and then I would leave the paper blank, and I would get back week after week, 0 after 0 after 0 after 0. My assumption was that in 2 or 3 weeks, the instructor is going to call me, is going to come to me and say, what exactly seems to be your problem? I prayed that he would do that, and he never did. I even took to the point on test days that rather than sit there in the class through the test, I got into the habit of going to the bathroom. I would raise my hands 10 minutes into the test, and frequently, because it was test day, there would be a substitute there giving the test, that the regular math teacher wasn't there on test day, more often than not. So there'd be another instructor that would be there covering for him. And 10 minutes into the test, I'd raise my hand, ask to go to the restroom, and I'd go to the restroom, and I'd take my time. I'd sit there. I'd go in there, and I'd sit in there for 20, 25 minutes. And then I'd come back 5 or 10 minutes before the end of the period. And then, I'd sit there for a few minutes, and he would call up the papers, and I'd turn in my empty paper. And then the next Monday, if they were turned back the next day, I'd get back my 0 and would repeat the same procedure the following week. And it just went on and on and on. And I just had the feeling that somebody would come to me and say, what's the problem? And they never did. And so the ball was in my court, and I really didn't know how to play it. And I see similarities between that and this vote that occurred last Thursday in Great Britain. Because the more information, and we talked about this yesterday and the day before both, the more information, the more we read about what's going on in England and the thinking of the people who supported the decision to leave the EU, the more we begin to see that these are the same kind of people that the data suggests are Trump people. They are middle age, they're not young, they're in their 40s, maybe 50s. In other words, they're far enough along in their working lives that they believe it's too late for them to go back and start all over again. They're on a path, they've been on a path for the better part of their working lives, and they feel that they're so far down that road that it's too late to change. They have no option but to keep going in the same direction, keep doing the same thing. So therefore, they feel vulnerable and helpless. At the same time, many of them feel useless because they don't have the skills. They've been told in any number of different ways that they don't have the skills that employers in today's world are looking for. They don't have the technology skills. They don't have the cognitive skills. Maybe they don't even have the interpersonal skills that the world seems to be asking for or looking for today. So even if they wanted to change, they feel that they couldn't. And so the fact of the matter is, they feel that they're sinking further and further down, and they're waiting for somebody to throw them a rope. And for one reason or another, nobody seems to do that. Nobody seems to realize or recognize that they're even there. And so basically, the decision to cast your ballot or hook your wagon, as it were, to a Donald Trump or to a referendum on the exit from the European Union seems to be a good way for these folks to lash out and say something. And it seems to me, and this is what we've been talking about in the last few days, it seems to me that we'd better start listening. We'd better start noticing. Because the fact of the matter is, the situation has been going on for enough time, long enough, that there are so many of these people who feel this way that it's becoming downright dangerous, as the vote in England tells us. Most of the experts didn't believe that the British people would ever vote to leave the EU. It didn't make sense. It didn't make good sense. Financially, economically, ethically, culturally, religiously, everything seems to suggest that that was not the right decision to take. And so most of the experts believed that the British people were smart enough to not take it. But they did. And what that suggests is that these people must have thought that their situation is dire. And that this was basically a do or die moment for them. This was the closest that anybody ever came and asked them what was wrong. And by voting against membership in the EU, they're saying, this is what's wrong. Everything that's associated with this participation in the European Union is wrong. Everything that used to matter, everything that used to be important is changing, is gone, is threatened. And what we want is the opportunity to go back to the world we had, when things were predictable, when jobs were there. We in Great Britain adopted a national health system. And the idea was that when people needed medical care, whatever it might be, they didn't have to worry about whether they could pay for it or not. It was already paid for. You just went to the doctor or the hospital, whatever the situation called for, and you got whatever the care was that you needed. But now we can't seem to get an appointment. They're too crowded. When you try to go to the doctor, you get an appointment way out. You can't seem to see a doctor, or you can't seem to see the doctor you want to see. Jobs. There's more and more competition for our jobs. The pressure on salaries is down. The pressure is on to be willing to work for less in order to secure employment. Long-term employment is gone. Companies are coming and going and folding and being bought out and moving and all of this stuff. In other words, the stability of the world we lived in seems to be disappearing. Everything that we thought we could count on looks like we can't. And so basically, if you think back over the last couple of days to our programs, it seems to me we touched on a number of issues or conclusions that we can draw. Obviously, we can't totally answer the situation, and we haven't read everything, and we haven't considered everything, obviously. But there's an awful lot that we have considered. There's an awful lot that we know. And so basically, one of the things that became very clear is that the vote to leave the EU was much more, or meant much more, to the people who cast it than the decision to leave the EU. That decision merely was a way of expressing frustration about a lot of other things. Immigration, the changing nature of the world around us, the changing nature and population of our neighborhoods, the changing nature of world politics, the whole issue of religion, the serious questions surrounding religious truths that we thought had been decided centuries ago. The number of people that are questioning the validity of religion at all. What's happening to traditional marriage? The issue of human life. The issue of violence. All of these things seem to be wrong. They weren't there in the world that we had yesterday. So let's do something that stops the world we're into today, and then we can begin the process of going back and recovering what we had. That seems to be the message, or at least a key message out of this vote. One more thing that we touched upon that I think is significant in this whole thing, and that is that there is evidence, plentiful evidence, that many people who voted in this referendum, in this election, didn't really know what they were voting on. They really didn't know the issues. Or at least they hadn't thought through the issues carefully enough so that their decision was an informed one. The evidence, the number of people who went to Google the weekend after the vote to look up the question, to look up the word Brexit, the decision in Great Britain to leave the European Union. A lot of people went online after the fact in order to gather information about the issue, suggesting that when they cast their ballots, they didn't know. What that suggests then is that their votes were probably votes that were cast based on what they were told or how they were told to vote, or the arguments they listened to, or the ideological perspective they felt most comfortable with. Translation, the people they most trusted for news and information. The British equivalent of Fox News, for example. Was loading up information urging a vote to leave. And since that's where I feel most comfortable, that's a position that most of the people that I tend to agree with seem to believe, it was the easiest thing for me to do to just go along. In other words, many of these votes clearly were the result of a PR campaign by those who were heavily invested in leaving the EU. The the hyper-nationalist party in England that wanted to halt the immigration. They wanted to do in England what Donald Trump promises to do here. Build a wall. They weren't talking about building a wall. They were just talking about leaving the international organization that's making it possible for all of these immigrants to come into Great Britain. So for them, it was a vote against immigration. For them, it was a vote that many people argued was racist, or that was hyper-nationalist, or that bordered on fascist. We have all the words, all the hot buttons to associate with this. The fact of the matter is, the situation was volatile, and the vote to leave the EU had a lot more to it than the vote to leave the EU, if that makes sense. There was a lot more to it than met the eye. One of the things we talked about yesterday was that we have the wisdom of the founders. And of course, this is the Virtual Center on the Study of the Constitution. We spent quite a bit of time looking at the thinking and the writings of the founders. And we came across places like Federalist Number 49, written by James Madison, in which Madison warned that when the situation is highly emotionally charged, when passions and emotions are running high, that is not the time to throw the question open to a majority rule type situation. That's not the time to hold an agenda. In Madison's thinking, that's not the time to call a constitutional convention. When people's passions are that inflamed, when people's emotions are that involved, that's not the time to throw the issue into the laps of the people. And in Federalist Number 49, Madison says, and this is a quote, "The passions, therefore, not the reason of the public, would sit in judgment. But it is the reason alone of the public that ought to control and regulate the government. The passions ought to be controlled and regulated by the government." When passions and emotion is running high, that's the time when leadership has to come to the fore. That's not the time to play Pontius Pilate, wash your hands of the situation, throw it into the laps of the general public, and say you all vote however you want. Not when people are that emotionally charged. In Madison's case, he was petrified about the anti-federalist efforts to call a second convention for purposes of amending the Constitution. There's absolutely no question that the reason James Madison switched from being an opponent of a Bill of Rights to supporting a Bill of Rights was to undercut the pressure to call a second convention. Madison was afraid that if those in positions of authority didn't go along and agree to support a Bill of Rights, human rights amendments to the Constitution, then it was probably going to be impossible to stop the pressure for another convention. And Madison knew that if another convention was held, the Constitution was dead before it even had a chance to get started. because emotions were high and there were so many people manipulating public opinion. There were so many demagogues out there preaching their particular line, their particular issues or complaints or hang-ups about the Constitution. People were so confused that their passions were in control. And Madison says in number 49, it's the reason of the public that must control government. But when the passions are in control, government must control them, must control those passions. Madison would say, if he were in Great Britain last Thursday, this referendum on leaving the EU is exactly what doesn't need to happen. David Cameron screwed up big time in scheduling this referendum in an emotional atmosphere like this, because there was so much frustration. Salaries were down. Average salaries of working people were going down, while the profits of corporations and the wealthy were going up. Inequality in the British society, as well as in this one, was becoming more and more of a problem. People were losing their jobs. People felt that there was pressure on their incomes, on their retirements, on their health care, on their religious beliefs. Many of the things that people took as being the most important things in their life were suddenly volatile, were no longer secure. They were frightened, they were angry, they were looking for a way to strike back. Not the time to hold a referendum on anything as important as membership in the European Union. So that's one thing that we looked at. Lo and behold, in this morning's New York Times, Thomas Friedman wrote an op-ed piece on this decision, on this vote, and said pretty much the same thing that we've been saying. Probably said it better, but he basically was saying the same thing. This is a quote from Friedman's article. The British vote by a narrow majority to leave the European Union is not the end of the world, but it does show us how we can get there. Attention, Donald Trump voters. This is what happens to a country that falls for hucksters who think that life can just imitate Twitter, that there are simple answers to hard questions, and that small men can rearrange big complex systems by just erecting a wall and everything will be peachy. I think the implication or the inference, the reference to the wall there is pretty self-explanatory. Friedman's position is the people who led public opinion into this vote never expected to win it. The example that Friedman uses is the dog chasing the car. All of us have had experience with dogs that chase cars. These politicians, Friedman says, assume that the dog will never catch the car and that they can have the best of all worlds, opposing something that's unpopular, but not having to deal with the implications of the public actually voting to get rid of it. But they so dumb down the debate with lies, fear-mongering, and misdirection, and with only a simple majority required to win, that the leave the EU crowd carries the day by a small margin. Presto, the dog catches the car. And of course, it has no idea what to do with the car. There's no plan. that's just barking. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday in some of the literature surrounding the EU. That there's political fallout all over Great Britain from this, as heads are rolling, because the leadership really never expected to win this damn thing. And now that they won it, they don't have a plan. They don't have a next step. And what they're talking about is maybe we can have another vote. Maybe we can do it again. And the people in Europe, like Angela Merkel of Germany, are saying, you guys did it, live with it. You need to be responsible for what you did. So get on with it and make your plans to get out. And all of these people that are saying, well, we're still going to have close commercial ties and we're still going to have a relationship with the European Union and all of that. Merkel's response to that is, you can't have all the benefits of membership and not to expect to bear any of the responsibilities. So the fact of the matter is, they're out. One of the things that we've talked about, made reference to the last couple of days, was the work that we did here several months ago on the writings of Richard Sennett, the sociologist, more specifically on his book, The Culture of the New Capitalism, which was written in 2005. In 2005, Richard Sennett laid out the ingredients of changes that were happening in global capitalism that he felt were contributing to exactly the kind of situation that seemingly produced this vote. Corporations were changing their priorities. They were redefining the ideal employee. Many of the characteristics of employment that had been long-standing and respected, accepted, and traditionally believed in this Western developing world were being overturned. All of us grew up, Richard Sennett talks about this, all of us grew up believing and valuing the idea of craftsmanship. The idea that what sets working people apart is the fact that they take pride in the job they do, whatever it happens to be. As they continue to do the same job over and over again, they become experts. They become, quote, professionals at it. They become craftsmen. And the whole idea modeled on industrialism, the whole idea of craftsmanship, is the idea that the new generation attaches itself to the old in what we've called the apprenticeship system. And apprentices will affix themselves to craftsmen, and thereby the craft will be passed on from generation to generation. We've all come to respect that. In fact, if you think about it, unions for a long time have been preaching their commitment to craftsmanship and the pride of a job well done. And unions claim that the advantage of a union job as to a non-union job is the quality of the workmanship. And unions promise that their apprentice programs, their training programs, will guarantee that the person who buys their labor is getting the best bang for the salary, for the buck, so to speak. Now, what Richard Sennett points out is that no longer are corporations looking for or respecting craftsmanship or experience. They're not looking for people who are used to doing the same job over and over again and becoming experts at it. They are looking instead for employees who are flexible, employees who can be moved from one job to another job, employees that have the right attitude. They don't become anchored to a particular set of chores. They're flexible. They'll do whatever the job calls for. Not only that, but they are self-learners. Their skills are not to become proficient in a few things, but rather to become qualified in many things. Because if the employer is going to be able to move the employee around, then the employee has to be flexible. The employee has to be able to master skills in a totally different variety of settings. The employee must be able to work well with others. The employee must be able to work in teams. In today's modern competitive world, projects are assigned to teams. And the success of the project, it becomes the success of the team. And the most valuable employee is the one who's a good team player, the one who can get along with everybody else, the one who is willing to contribute his or her skills and talents to the particular job being done, but at the same time who's willing to accept the fact that other people in the team have talents to contribute as well. And that what makes the team work is the substance, the combination, or the totality of all of these individual employees contributing their unique skills to the overall task. And then when that task is completed, the employee moves into a totally different employment setting with a totally different group of team members, and suddenly must find that this particular task calls for a whole different set of skills than the task he just left or she just left. But because our employer is flexible and what they call facile and able to move smoothly from one set of challenging situations or circumstances to another, our employee, the ideal employee, is the self-learner, the quick learner, the one who can think quick, who can react quickly. Sennett makes the point, and I think it's well taken point. Think of standardized tests like the college boards or the ACT exams. What do they test? They test your ability to answer a number of questions with a clock ticking away all the time. In other words, time becomes a factor. Not only do you have to come up with the right answers, but you got to do it fast. You got to be able to think quickly on your feet. You got to be able to move. And so our system of standardized tests is designed to measure those kinds of skills. Not the old craftsmanship, experience, emphasis on repeat, on rote. Rather, the ideal employee is the facile, quick thinker who can move fast, who can size up situations and speculate or postulate potential conclusions quickly. Our ideal employee is a problem solver. Our ideal employee has potential, not experience, potential. The learning potential to be able to become a self-learner and a continued contributor to a corporation or an organization with a changing set of tasks and challenges. That ultimately is what defines the ideal employee in the new capitalism. What characterizes the corporation itself, what characterizes the organization, is a whole different set of structures as well. the organization or the corporation that is seen to be active and vital and vibrant is the organization that seems to be the best. Those organizations that seem to be stable, that seem to be stuck in their ways and do the same things they always did over and over again, don't make it in today's world. So the irony of the situation is, it's the companies that are constantly making changes, that are constantly changing things around and moving people around, that seem to be the most vital and the most vibrant, the most exciting and the most successful. So the irony of the situation is that many corporations move around for the sake of moving, because it makes, to the shareholders, it looks like they're being active, they're being vital. They're constantly adjusting to new circumstances and new challenges, when in fact what they may be doing more than anything else is trying to impress the shareholders. But the thing that most impresses the shareholders are the bottom line reports. And so therefore, the corporate managers become accountable not to employees, but to the shareholders. It's the vitality and the bottom line profit of the company that drives the organization. And therefore, the company makes sure that the bottom line reports are positive and that the totals are in black, never red. And so therefore, rather than the good organization, the good manager being accountable to the employees, the fact of the matter is the employees become merely a means to the corporate ends of satisfying the shareholder. And so all the things that we associated in the mind of employees with job security are gone. Corporations come and go. They buy out. They're bought out by other organizations. They change their names. They enter into contracts, and then they break those contracts, changing the name, declare bankruptcy, reorganize, come out under another name. In other words, all the things that spelled security and stability for the employees are gone. The result is that employees increasingly are on their own. The younger ones are able to handle that, and they see it as a challenge. But the old crowd, the vets, the 20 and 25-year employees, they're the ones who are threatened. They're the ones who are frightened. They're the ones who are desperate to try to hold on to a world that seems to be leaving them and they can't do anything about it. So they dig in their heels and they look for an answer. In Great Britain, leaving the European Union seemed to be the most appropriate answer. In this country, Donald Trump, in the minds of many people, seems to be the appropriate answer. With that, it seems to me, we have pretty well sized up what I think is the nature of the problem and what it signifies. We've gone a little bit beyond the top of the hour. It's 3 minutes after the top of the hour. So why don't we pause, take our 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do our second hour and we'll pursue this, mainly by looking at the issue of progressivism, which we called yesterday, as seemingly a viable solution to this dilemma. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. After a 5-minute break, we'll be right back. Please stay with us. Thank you for hanging on. This is Bill O'Brien. It's 18 minutes after the hour. We just killed almost 15 minutes. I lost my ability to communicate with the network, and I couldn't quite figure out how to get it back. And it's kind of the same thing we were talking about in the first hour. I kept waiting for somebody in the studio to call me back and say, "Is everything okay?" And I finally got that call, and I thank Agnes for it. But I usually just drop them a quick chat line and just say ready when it's time to go back. And this time, for some reason, I lost the the ability to do that. I didn't know how to get it. So what I did was shut my computer down and reboot it. And I apologize for the lost time. Thank you if you've stuck with us through our first hour and you hung on through this rather long and unfortunate delay. And this is entirely my fault, and I apologize for it. Welcome to the second hour of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. We've still got 40 minutes left, so we've got a substantial part of our second hour to go. And I wanted to continue a little bit of on this issue. I'd like to kind of, at least when the day ends today, I'd like to feel that we pretty well covered the lot on this British vote, at least what we know now. I'm sure we're going to be finding more as the days go on. Let me remind you that we do have a phone number, and that number is there so that you can call in and be heard not only by me, but more important, by our other listeners. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to email me directly, is waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. And again, I do remind you of our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook, and in the search box, type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be onto our Facebook page. And I will be posting an item on the Facebook page, if not later today, then first thing in the morning. And it's going to be related to this issue that we've been talking about, the Brexit vote. I started to put it on, as I mentioned. I had the makings of it. I had the Madison quote from Federalist 49, and I had the quote from Thomas Friedman's article about the dog chasing the car, and surprisingly caught the car, and what the implication of that means. There's one more perspective, one more issue that I think we ought to at least touch on. I don't want to spend the bulk of our program today on this. In other words, I do want to get to the issue of progressivism, at least for a bit. But there's one issue that occurred to me during the break that we really ought to consider. And that's the administrative structure of the EU itself and Britain's role within it. There's absolutely no question, if you read the literature about this vote, about the political situation and the political volatility in England that led up to this vote, you begin to get the idea that there is a lot of concern about the structure of the EU itself, namely about the role of the member nations in the EU and their relationship to the organization and to the commissions and councils which manage this international organization. And what we are into here is the whole issue of administrative management. Because it seems to me that there is a concern, there is a feeling on the part of many people who supported the vote to leave the EU, that the organization really didn't represent the priorities and the interests of the British people. Now, again, a lot of this, it can be classified as PR on the part of those who want to see the vote to leave. But the fact of the matter is, the structure and the way that the structure functions is important as well. We have no better place to go for an example of that than the debate that existed in this country that we've spent so much time on here at the Virtual Center on the transition from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution of the United States. The issue that confronted Madison and Hamilton and the other the other founders, was the issue of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation as opposed to the potential strengths of the Constitution. It's very obvious that the success of the Constitution, the success of the Union, is going to be determined not by the power of the central government exclusively, but by the interaction and the relationship between the central government and the state governments. If you take an employment situation, a corporation, or even just an individual factory, and look at the structure or the interaction, the organizational day-to-day operations between management and employees, the success of the organization depends on the back and forth and the level of trust and security that exists in the information flow back and forth between employee and employer. The concern, if you remember, at the time of the Articles of Confederation, the states who ratified the Articles were very protective, very defensive over preserving the power of the state. And so the central organization that they created under the Articles was not a national government per se, but rather a league of friendship. That's what they called it right in the document. A league of friendship between sovereign independent states. So what that meant was that the power ultimately stayed with the states, stayed with the members, not with the central organization. And the argument that the anti-federalists used in trying to defeat the Constitution's ratification, the basis of their argument was that the Constitution was going to create a consolidated national government which would have power over the states and would render the state's sovereignty and importance insignificant. In other words, the anti-federalists hoped to defeat the Constitution by convincing the voters that to ratify the Constitution eliminated the power of the state and shifted it to the central government, and that from then on, the power of local government to protect the individual rights of citizens, their freedoms, their religious freedom, their right to free press, their right to speech, and all of those things would be compromised by the power of the central government. So what Madison and Hamilton had to do in the Federalist Papers was reassure and convince skeptical voters that the power of the states remained significant, and that the states had a number of ways that they could limit and check the power of the central government. So in a sense, what Madison did was instill a number of checks and balances, separated power into the three branches of government, and built in institutional checks and balances in order to limit the ability of the central government to make the kinds of decisions which would run roughshod over the states. The point I'm trying to make is that the success of the Union was going to be based not on the power of the central government, but on the ability of the central government and the state governments to work together toward the same goals, the same ends. And what that means is that there had to be an interaction, a back and forth mutual exchange, and a sense of trust between the two levels of government. That means that in areas where the central government did have the authority and the power, it had to be very careful not to abuse that power, or at least not to appear that the central government was taking that power for granted, or that there was an effort to minimize or reduce the power and significance and importance of the states. So, in a sense, that's the only way that an organization this complex could work. It appears that a lot of those considerations are absent in the day-to-day operations of the European Union. The positions are, the arguments of those who wanted to leave the EU suggest that there was within the organization in Brussels an attitude of elitism over the member nations, to the point that decisions were being made and imposed on Great Britain and other members of the EU, which they really didn't have an opportunity to have input in. For example, the one that gets the most attention, obviously, is the idea of immigration and the idea of pluralism. The idea of a nation with a firm, clearly defined set of values and cultural priorities was being flooded from immigrants from other places around the world, other cultures, other religions, which changed the nature of the game within England, within the British Empire, Great Britain generally. And that Britain really didn't have the opportunity to do anything about it. That Britain felt powerless to do anything about immigration, or to do anything about the influx of immigrants, foreigners, into its nation. And again, you can call it racist if you want, but the fact of the matter is it's threatening, because it promises and poses a number of changes that are so dramatic that the Great Britain that existed was rapidly becoming only a memory. And it's obvious that the British people, many of them, at least the majority of them, believed that the only way to solve this problem is to leave the organization. So what that means is we need to go back and rethink the whole idea of management as a profession, as a skill. The whole idea of the professional administrator or management. The idea that it's not just the position of the guy in charge, so to speak, but that there are a whole set of management skills. Knowing how to communicate and interact with people. Knowing how to involve people. Knowing how to delegate. Knowing how to make decisions in the interests of the organization, but at the same time successfully convince every employee in the organization that what the organization is doing is in their own self-interest. That every member of the operation, of the organization, will be better off for the decisions and the priorities that the organization is implementing. And the successful administration is the one that can maintain that kind of interaction, that kind of trust, that kind of faith between top and bottom, so to speak. It's very obvious from much of what was being written about the European Union that that sense of trust, faith, and respect did not exist. England felt like it was in an organization that was running roughshod over its own priorities, its own culture, its own language, its own currency, its own development future, its commercial priorities, all of it. In other words, there really doesn't seem to have been the level of attention to how you manage an organization this complex that included so many different languages, so many different cultures, so many different religions, and do it in a way with respect, which respected and valued pluralism, respected and valued diversity. It appears that many of the EU officials that were making policy in Brussels were hard and fast, cold administrators and little else. They were business leaders, corporate attorneys who had an international perspective that oftentimes wasn't shared by the membership, but they didn't seem to care, but they had because they had the power to impose their will on the members. That seems to be a problem. How serious? It's hard to tell, because a lot of this is PR. A lot of this, just like the struggle over ratification, a lot of it reflects the efforts of anti-federalist leaders to exaggerate the problems. So it becomes a little bit difficult, at least for now, to know exactly how serious those problems were. But there's no question but that they existed. And I think it's a consideration that all of us need to take into consideration as we continue to try to understand the innards, the inner workings of this kind of monumental decision. If the EU is going to be successful, even without Great Britain, it's going to be because the members in it believe that they, and by they I mean not only the governments of these nations, but their citizens as well, are gaining more by membership than they are losing. And it's up to the leaders of the EU to sell that, to convince members of that. It seems to appear that there really wasn't enough attention paid to that particular aspect. So I think all of us would be would do well to at least consider that possibility. In yesterday's program, and this is where I'd like to kind of bring our week to a close on this particular issue, I raised the issue of progressivism as perhaps being the answer to this kind of issue, both in Great Britain's situation, but also here in the United States in our election. It seems to me that the either-or choice, the choice of Brits to either stay in or to leave, are the most obvious choices available. But there's another option. And the other option is to adopt a much more sensitive, much more humane, much more considerate approach to governance. It's important to make people feel important, to make people feel relevant, to make people feel that they matter, to make people feel that we're all in this together, that we all have something to contribute, and that we all have things to gain by working together and making the operation work. Whether it's a political party running for election as the Republicans and the Democrats are doing here, or whether it's an international organization like the European Union. What we call progressivism, what I call progressivism, is more than a set of principles and policies. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. It basically says that if we work together and do things in your best interests as well as our best interests, we all win. But if it begins to appear that one of us is operating selfishly and taking advantage of the other, then the trust factor disappears. And when that disappears, the whole operation begins to slow down and ultimately will break down. It seems to me that if there are significant numbers of people in the developed world, Great Britain, the United States, who feel that the system is rigged, who feel that it's really not fair, that nobody really cares about them, that policies and programs are being adopted and implemented only to support the rich and the powerful, and that the little guy is being taken advantage of and can expect nothing to change, then voting for drastic change like Donald Trump or voting to leave the European Union seems to be the most viable solution. The alternative is to come up with a kind of a program or policy or mindset that eliminates the kinds of pressures and psychological concerns that are producing or feeding that. Government has to begin to care about all of its people, not just a few of its people. To care about people as people, not just wealth and property. To care about more than the bottom line, so to speak. When government doesn't do that, people's faith, trust, and support of it will diminish and ultimately disappear. People will find themselves in the kind of psychological frame of mind where no change is too drastic. Anything, even if we don't know what the future holds, is better than what the present holds. You don't want your people to ever get to that point. Therefore, government must adopt the kinds of policies and programs that speak to a sense of concern, a sensibility, an element of genuine caring about people that I like to define as progressivism. I see it in the Sanders campaign. A couple of days ago, to be exact, on the 23rd of June, in the Washington Post, Bernie Sanders responded to a question. What do you guys want? What does the Sanders campaign want? What do the people supporting it want? And Bernie Sanders took to answering that question. He says, as we head towards the Democratic National Convention, I often hear the question, what does Bernie want? Wrong question, he says. The right question is, what do the 12 million Americans who voted for a political revolution want? What is it that these people are saying? What is it that the people who voted to leave the European Union are saying? What are they telling us? Bernie Sanders takes that question on. He said the answer is they want real change in this country. They want it now. And they are prepared to take on the political cowardice and the powerful special interests which have prevented that change from happening. They understand that the United States is the richest country in the history of the world, and that new technology and new innovation make us wealthier every single day. What they don't understand is why the middle class continues to decline, why 47 million of us live in poverty, why many Americans are forced to work 2 and 3 jobs just to cobble together an income that will allow them to survive. What do they want? They want an economy that's not based just on greed, monopolistic practices, and illegal behavior. They want an economy that protects and respects the human needs and dignity of all people, children, the elderly, the sick, working people, the poor. They want an economic and a political system that works for everybody, not one in which almost all the new wealth and power goes to a handful of billionaires. This sounds like a typical Sanders speech, campaign rally. But in essence, he's saying it over and over and over again. Because that's what it's about. That's what creates hope. That's what causes people to look to the future. That's what causes people to really begin to speculate as to what kind of specific policies and programs can we implement that'll bring this about. When people start to think this way, they become willing to work together and work toward a common goal. That's what leaders must do. That's what leadership is the ability to build that kind of spirit, that kind of attitude, not just in a few people, but all your people. When people feel desperate, feel frightened, feel all alone, feel that nobody cares, the last thing that they need is for people in positions of authority to read them the rules, to basically point out to them that the way the law's written, this is just the way it is, we can't do anything about it. People don't want that. They don't want the small print. They don't want that 5 seconds of rapid talk at the end of the commercials that you can't even understand. But what in effect it really is a disclaimer for everything that the ad promised consumers. You pay millions of dollars to put a 30-second or a 60-second ad on television. You spend 25 of the 30 seconds or 55 of the 55 seconds of the minute selling the idea that this is the best program since sliced bread for the consumer. And then at the end, you have this voice rapidly ticking off a number of qualifiers which cover the corporation or the organization or the company as far as liability is concerned. People don't want to hear that crap. In fact, there's an insurance company, an auto insurance company, that has an ad. And what they're advertising is when you wreck your new car and you find out that the insurance company that you have for your car won't cover the full price of the car, but wants to deduct a portion. And the way the ad goes, if you think about it, I think we've all seen it. When you call the company or write them or email them, what they say is look at clause X on page 5 of your contract. What does it say? Blah, 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 blah. It's legal jargon that means nothing, but it covers the ass of the company. People are damn sick and tired of that crap. They don't want to hear it. So therefore, the company that employs all the people, namely its government, or the organization that contains all of these independent nations in Europe, has to stop the blah, 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 blah. You have to stop it. And that's what Bernie Sanders has been saying over and over and over. He starts talking about the campaign finance system as being corrupt. He talks about Citizens United and the ability to big money to buy elections. He talks about the fact that the criminal justice system is broken. We are the only nation in the modern world to have more than 2 million people, 2.2 million people incarcerated. A nation that spends $80 billion a year keeping people locked up. We can't afford free colleges. We can't afford reasonable tuition for higher education. We can't afford health care. We can't afford to increase the minimum wage. But we can afford $80 billion to lock people up? Think about it. Think about what that says as far as our priorities are concerned. What this entire program that Bernie Sanders ran on, the $15 minimum wage, the checks on Wall Street, the breaking up the big banks, and all the rest of it, is sending a message to people that to us, if you elect us, you matter the most. You are their priority. Not just a few of you, not just those of you with higher education degrees, not just a few of you whose bank account or whose annual salary is in 6 or 9 figures. All of you. If you can successfully convince people that what you're saying is sincere, you'll win. And that's why Bernie Sanders is pulling millions of people. Donald Trump is pulling the support of millions of people as well. What's the difference? The difference is that Trump is telling people, I will roll back change. I will build a wall. I'll guarantee the nation that we used to have, because I will keep out everything that threatens to change it. Elect me, and you can restore the past. What Bernie Sanders is saying, what progressives are saying, is you can't restore the past. You've got to embrace and master the present and the future. You've got to turn what's happening. You've got to turn technology, turn the information revolution into something that works for, not against people. That's what people expect from their leaders. We've got to begin to give it to them. If we do, then people won't be voting to leave the UN. People won't be sucked in to the hucksters who promise the past that you can't recover. Here in West Virginia, we're promising these people coal. We're promising these people to restore its past by bringing back coal. The whole world is headed in a different direction. And what we're saying is vote for us and we'll keep the future out of West Virginia. That is suicidal. That is counterproductive. Because as long as people believe that and support that, then they aren't looking to find ways to get a grip on what's happening and to control change rather than allowing change to control them. That's the issue. That's really what this is about. The specifics of the platform are not the most important thing, because there are probably things in these platforms that many people believe, I support everything but that. I can't support that. Or there are maybe things that you feel ought to be in the platform that aren't. The most important issue is not what's in there or what's not in there. The most important issue is that the platform itself is there. That it's a people-oriented platform that is designed finally, after all of this time, to make people's priority government's priorities. Or to make the member nations of the European Union the priorities of the Brussels organization. When member nations believe that's true, you won't get votes like we got in England. I would suggest to you that this is the same debate that happened in the 18th century in the transition from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution of the United States. Even more specific, it's the same conflict or difference of opinion that was the major issue on the table at the time of the Civil War. Are we going to go toward a future, toward an industrial future in which America can lead the world? Or are we going to remain stuck in an agricultural colonial past in which we continue to produce raw materials for the best interests of the world around us and the best interests of the financial leaders in that world? Those were the issues. That was the debate. And now we're in a similar kind of situation. Information technology, the internet, has changed the world to the point that it has rendered significant elements of our population obsolete, useless, redundant, unnecessary. That's the problem. That's the issue we need to fix. And we've got to find political leaders or organizational leaders that are willing to fix it. But before they can fix it, before we can expect them to try to fix it, we've got to make sure that they are willing to condone its existence. You can't fix a problem until you acknowledge that there's a problem. And one of the things that's very wrong in our political conversations today in this country is that there's a whole mentality out there that is seeking support for the American people by denying the existence of the problem and threatening that the way to solve all of our problems is to go back to a past before those problems even existed. You can't do that. You can't put the genie back in the box. You've got to basically find a way to deal with a world where the genie is already out of the box. That's really, it seems to me, what this whole thing is about. Well, it's 58 minutes after the hour, so I think we've pushed our way to the end of our broadcast week here at the Virtual Center. I want to thank all of you. First of all, I want to thank many of you for the comments the emails that you've sent me, the issues of concern. I appreciate that. Believe me, it matters. It matters a lot. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you will have a wonderful evening, a wonderful week. This is the 4th of the July weekend. At this point, as far as I know, we'll be doing a program on Monday the 4th. Bob and I usually talk about this. We're scheduled actually to meet on Saturday. So I think one of the things we'll be talking about will be our programming schedule for Monday. But as of now, I would expect that we will be doing our regular program on Monday, July 4th. I hope that you have a wonderful evening and weekend, and I want to thank you for the support that you continue to show for this program and for the Head On Radio Network generally. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you very, very much. I hope you have a great week. Look forward to being with you again next week. Thank you.